It's been years since I actually created a resume. Most of the jobs or companies I've now worked for was through folks approaching me on GitHub. I think the bigger problem for open source is, at the moment, it's sort of being killed with kindness and a lot of slop from people that are trying to contribute. I look for like active contributors, then I look for their pull requests and I filter on the ones that are merged, and I just try and sort of copy their style. It reduces the cognitive load for a reviewer to understand what you're actually proposing if you speak their language. I don't want to lose my identity through using agents, but I think you should use them, but just don't let it sort of steal your identity. Don't outsource your thinking to it.
Yeah, that's how you maintain ownership. If you've ever thought about contributing to open source, but you haven't actually started, then this episode is for you. I'm joined by Bruno Schaatsbergen, and he is an open source legend. We discuss how open source has shaped his career, what the impact is of agentic on open source, how to make it easy for yourself to start and for the maintainers to actually merge your pull requests, and much, much more. So enjoy. I think open source is one of the coolest things we have within this industry, specifically in tech, and I haven't been in any other industry, so that's easy to say. But I wonder what role open source has played throughout your career.
Yeah, it's pretty much shaped my career. It's a form of escapism for me. So usually after my 9 to 5 at different customers, I find myself working on projects. Terraform has been a huge sort of ecosystem, as well as the tool itself that I contributed to, which eventually ended up me leaving Xebia, where I'm currently employed at, to work for HashiCorp, which was quite cool. So part of my career, I would say I thank to open source. And it's that form of, like I said, escapism. I'm quite of an introvert person. I like to put my headphones on, get some solo time. And instead of reading fiction or watching a movie, I quite enjoy sort of shaping, as if you were a chef, shaping the kitchens and pans and pots you work with. I get to shape sort of the tools that many of my colleagues work with. It's quite rewarding in that sense. And it has allowed me to build up a lot of confidence in the pride I take in the work we do and the artifacts that I produce as an engineer. And when I mentioned that is I really value the artifacts that I produce. So the code that I write is just part of it, but also how I propose it to a team or a project, and how I write a blog about it. A lot of people that I work with or that have seen my contributions will see that sometimes in GitHub, you can see how many times you edited a message. I sometimes find myself working on a PR for an hour, and I spend about 2 hours or 3 hours on the actual proposal or sort of the PR description. And it's edited like 15 times because I'm trying to find the right words for it.
Why is it specifically open source contributions? Why aren't these just personal projects? Because I know a lot of people that do projects and they really work in their own kind of sphere, but you continuously work and you provide, you polish tooling, is what you mentioned. Yeah.
It's the gift I provide to the community.
Well, why is that?
If you look at how some companies approach this open core model, is where they get sort of rapid feedback and free test users. I like to produce code, share it with colleagues, but also get feedback on the things I do. I take it as a feedback loop.
And have you, because typically what I've heard, my colleagues, for example, they want to contribute to open source, but then their PR gets stale or it stays open for a long, long time. And then when they get feedback, it's like maybe nitpicking, or maybe the whole solution direction was just wrong. So that investment, not just the time investment, but also like emotional investment, people want to close their PRs. They want their changes to be merged. That's the feeling of fulfillment. When it stays open for a long time, I feel like they'll lose it and they probably won't contribute anymore. How do you accommodate for that? Yeah,
that's a very common problem, I would say, in open source. I had the exact same experience when I started out. As anyone that tries to contribute to a project for the first time is sort of trying to find its way, right? Just writing the code is one thing, but the way how you create your PR, what kind of title you use, what kind of commit message you use, all of those are sort of part of your contribution. And how I at some point navigated that is in GitHub, there's a great way to figure out who contributes the most to the repo. So I look for like active contributors, then I look for their pull requests, and I filter on the ones that are merged, and I just try and sort of copy their style of the maintainers that are proposing those PRs or merging things in. It reduces the cognitive load for a reviewer to understand what you're actually proposing if you speak their language. If you do something that's completely the opposite, usually when I review PRs on my projects or projects I contribute to that are not conform to style or the documentation we've published, I don't want to say that I would say I sort of mentally park them until I get some time to sort of dig into their proposal. Lowering that cognitive load for maintainers is something I think is really important. It worked for me, and it worked for those who I advised to do so.
This is really like knowing your audience, which is, for me, it's a bit counterintuitive because sometimes I've had conversations with people, and I was also like this. This is the way I like to structure my commits. This is the way I like to structure my PRs. It's very personal, but you are offering something that gets merged into a greater whole. So your audience is the people that are going to review this, that are like the gate between you and the merging. Yeah. So accommodating for that, it does make a lot of sense.
Yes.
I've never thought of that though.
Okay.
It's really cool.
Hereby, I would say try it out.
Yeah. Yeah. So then that makes the process a lot easier. For me, especially when I think about contributing to open source, it's open. I feel like I'm a little bit naked, which also means that, especially early in career, I advise people to do it. I feel like it's good. I agree with you. It's really good feedback. It's solid. But there is also always the sense of imposter syndrome, where it's very much out of your comfort zone if you've never done it. I feel like if you do that continuously, if you're like you probably have an opinion on how you structure things and you take pride in that. You've become good at that. It's easier when you're good, and it's not easy when you're not good. How do you accommodate for that, or what would your advice be?
Yeah. So I would say read a lot of code, read a lot of open source code, try to understand how other people do this. I would say the way I write code nowadays has been shaped by open source. And it has obviously been shaped by the code that I read through my 9 to 5, but it's somehow different. I think a lot of people unintentionally or unconsciously take inspiration from how open source code is written, especially those that contribute to those projects. If you are a beginner that finds yourself in a position where you either feel this sort of imposter syndrome, where like, oh, am I good enough to contribute or not? I would say spend time reading code. There's tons of amazing projects out there that keep a really high bar on code quality. Find something that's within your niche or within your industry. For me, it was Terraform.
Yeah,
and Terraform's ecosystem. Mitchell and Armon and Martin Atkins and a lot of folks over at HashiCorp spent a decade building an amazing ecosystem. And most of the Go code I write nowadays has been shaped by sort of reading all the code from all those projects. So read more than you write to begin with.
Gotcha. Yeah. And the fact that you do this, it gives you energy, because a lot of people 9 to 5, they're like, this is my tech stuff, this is my regular day-to-day things, and they don't want to do more tech things outside of work.
It does. It does give me energy, but it's like I said in the beginning, it's also a form of escapism for me.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of an introvert person, so you won't see me in clubs or bars or whatever. So that's definitely a forum for me to sort of escape from life and personal things and work on these projects. On the other side, it's being able to. I use, for example, Terraform or Kubernetes a lot. Being able to also contribute to it allows me to better understand the tools that I work with.
Oh, that's smart.
Like a chef that gets to design their own pans and knives. It also allows you to position yourself in a certain. It allows you to position yourself among your colleagues as someone that can be perceived as someone having a certain sense of thought leadership on how these tools should be used, as you get to sort of peek behind the curtains, which I think is really important. My first contributions started funny enough, at Xebia, actually.
Okay.
I was working at Adidas, and they wanted to build a machine learning platform on AWS, and a lot of the resources that we required for services were not in the Terraform AWS provider at that time. So I figured, maybe I'll just give it a shot and contribute something. And my first contribution got merged relatively quickly. And I got to bring this towards the customer saying, like, hey, I I sort of unblocked you, we now get to use these new Terraform resources that I added. And they were quite impressed, which positioned me as a consultant in a good spot.
Yeah.
And that was quite satisfying, that feeling. So that's when I started contributing more. That's how, so I would say, my contributions begin.
Gotcha. Yeah. I remember a time, and I think this triggered me like 5, 6, 7 years ago, kind of early in my career, where we also were working with Terraform, and there was something that we needed that was not supported. So one of my colleagues just built it. I was like, "Oh, you just built the thing?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Man, this is what senior engineers do. They just build something and then it's contributing to open source." I thought it was really cool, but then I never took the conscious step to actually start doing it myself. Would you advise people to start contributing to open source in any aspect of their career? Does it matter if you're early in career or more senior, or what's your take?
I think, and this is something that I would say I +1 with this opinion. It's something that Mitchell shared, Mitchell Hashimoto. He said some of the best engineers don't have a great GitHub profile, and don't spend all their time on social media or writing code outside of their 9 to 5, because they are the ones to least context switch. It doesn't really, you don't become a better engineer by forcing yourself to contribute to open source. But if you generally are interested in understanding how some of the tooling works, so currently in my position as an engineer here at Exebia, I use a lot of software. I get to build less. So I get to build on top of Kubernetes. I get to use Terraform or AWS CDK, but I don't get to build those tools from scratch. And that is something I was missing. I'm a software engineer by heart, but I now end up just using like APIs and writing configuration files. For me to better understand Terraform, I started contributing to it. But if you find yourself already writing code from 9 to 5, I wouldn't say you hugely benefit off of contributing to it. The only angle that might be interesting is sort of the social aspect to it. Nowadays, a lot of folks can contribute to open source using AI, but part of your contribution is the research you do at first, understanding the different GitHub issues, even looking whether there is a GitHub issue or not, making one according to the documentation, then joining like this community hour where you present your own research and sort of the patch you want to create or the fix you want to propose. I think that is something a lot of engineers could benefit from, which are sort of the social aspects of it.
Last time I spoke about open source on the podcast in and of its own, I got a comment that says, "Oh, the Primogen had this podcast and he was saying don't contribute to open source." And they were actually talking about this other video, which had millions of views. I think above 5 million views. It was about something related to Kubernetes. And they said, well, you just go here and here to this repository and you change the README. And that's what people were doing. They were bombarding this repository with all README changes. And like, damn, this is like the dark side. This is the downside of telling people to contribute to open source and they don't necessarily provide value. They just provide change. And change is not always good. I feel like it needs to be valuable.
Yeah, there's a high signal to noise ratio at the moment. And there has always been before AI as well. AI has lowered the contribution barrier for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
But before that, people just wanted to get their name into the list of contributors, which I think there's nothing wrong with. Changing something in the README if there's genuinely a typo or whatever as your first contribution is a good way to get familiar with the process. I think the bigger problem for open source is at the moment, and that's how I feel, it's sort of being killed with kindness and a lot of slop from people that are trying to contribute.
What do you mean with kindness?
Well, there's a lot of people don't just randomly target repos and run an agent against it. People genuinely want to contribute, but they don't want to put in the time and effort. There's this filter on open source contributions. There's a filter on open source in general. It's consistency and commitment wins over, sort of beats intensity. It's easy to generate a PR using an agent, but making sure it's conform the language of the maintainers and according to the styling and showing up in that community hour, that's another thing. So yeah, there are tons of, I think if you look at, I think curl recently closed its bug bounty program because it was sort of bombarded with
Attempts.
with attempts.
Yeah.
Most of them which were making no sense at all. There might be genuine intention from people because I like to assume that. I don't want to assume the bad and the worst in people. But it is a burden on maintainers. And maintainers are sort of now in this stage where if you put in 5 minutes, then I will put 5 minutes back of my time into reviewing it, which could mean, oh, it's generated by AI, so I will close it.
Yeah,
that's what some maintainers do.
Okay.
Which I think it's sort of putting a burden on maintainers.
Yeah, I feel like the burden on maintainers was already there. And now there's this trend of we just have so much execution power, we can generate a lot. I feel like reviewing in and outside of open source is going to be a problem we need to solve because we are creating so much code. And then there's not many people that review as much code, I think, as open source maintainers specifically, especially if it's something that they've built up from scratch. It's like something that they take a lot of pride in. They will put in the time and effort to do that. I genuinely believe that. But I'm also the same. If I get bombarded with messages that say, oh, I want to edit for the podcast, I'm like, yeah, well, I can only do so much. So at some point you just see it as noise, which is a shame if there's people in there that genuinely want to contribute. But I don't know how to solve this problem yet.
Yeah, it's something I find myself struggling with as well. It's interesting. So a lot of maintainers take different approaches to this. Mitchell, who I used to work with at HashiCorp, who unfortunately left, now built Ghosty, which is a terminal. He also deals with a lot of like AI contributions, and he's working or prototyping a system called Vouch, where instead of sort of trust by default, so anyone is a great contributor and anyone has good intentions, it's now sort of a deny by default or reject by default, as in you have to prove yourself as a trusted committer first. So that is one approach that people take, and he just sort of straight up closes your PR if it's Slop, and then next time if you create a PR, it gets auto closed. So that is one approach. I understand, and I see his reasoning behind why. I think the Flux team. Flux is a very popular Kubernetes deployment tool. I won't bother with introducing what the whole project is, but they also have an interesting approach. If you raise like a bug issue there saying, oh, there's this race condition in this code path, instead of spending hours as a maintainer trying to understand and reproduce this race condition, which is a very hard problem, they just throw a bunch of agents on this issue who try and replicate what you're saying.
Okay.
So they are not the ones anymore that spend the time on it, as in the maintainers, but they outsource this thinking and reproducing to agents.
Cool.
So there's various approaches to how maintainers deal with this, and I don't know what the right approach is yet.
Gotcha. Do you yourself use any agentic tools when you contribute to open source?
Yeah.
You already mentioned you have a lot of like passion for the craft. So do you?
I do. Yeah. AI is, in my opinion, it's a revolutionary tool, and I would be crazy if I were to say I'm not using it or not gonna use it. I use it as sort of a pair programmer. I love pair programming. It's what I used to do before AI, and I would pick someone else's brain. I let it generate some code, sometimes even, I would say, 2 in parallel, see what sort of differences are. I use AMP to do a lot of like researching of deeper code paths and understanding larger code bases. And I use Claude through OpenCode to work on features and things like that. But I take a lot of pride in what I eventually propose.
Yeah.
So it might be that I work on a feature on a project for like half a day or 2 days, and I spend a whole other day like polishing up that code, making sure I understand everything, crafting a proper PR description, because I don't want to lose my identity through using agents. But I think you should use them, but just don't let it sort of steal your identity, or don't outsource your thinking to it.
Yeah, that's how you maintain ownership.
Yeah.
That's for me is the biggest risk, because now generating code has become easier. So it's also it's a very small step to do a lot of it, basically, but a lot is not always better, which means that if you do take pride in this, and this is kind of what you perceive your craft, you still need to maintain ownership of it. And that for me is interesting because not everyone has the same passion or the same vigor to actually own this thing. So then you get generated a lot of things we call slop nowadays.
Yeah. And who's liable for the things that are being generated, right? Is it the agent or is it the author of the code? I generally view myself as an author of code. When I produce something, when I write something, whether it's in the README or whether it's a comment on a function or whether it's a new struct I introduce or a whole new functionality, I see myself as the author, which results in me being the owner of this piece.
Gotcha.
And I think that is really important. Yeah. A lot of people just push code without assuming that they'll have to ever fix it or own it or that they're liable for it.
I was talking over lunch with Nico, guest that came on the episode there probably last week. And he was talking to me about this Veritasium video that came out. It's a YouTube channel, and they talked about someone that hacked something in an open source project and that almost made it into quite a lot of systems, which gave me a thought, because right now I can make an anonymized account on GitHub. I can contribute a whole lot and someone will never know who I am, which also means there's not really any personal information within those accounts. And I'm wondering if it would be better, maybe for the industry, if there was a one-on-one, Patrick is this on GitHub, like I am also on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Interesting one. I think it is important to understand who's contributing to your project. But if a patch or a proposal or a piece of code makes sense, I wouldn't be rejecting it. But proposing when you contribute to your project or when you become like sort of a trusted contributor, there's sort of levels to this, right? In some projects, you sort of graduate to different tiers or levels or ranks. So on certain projects like a Crow Kube Resource Orchestrator, I get certain permissions to do things.
Cool.
On certain Terraform repos, before working at HashiCorp, I had the ability to triage issues or close or merge PRs.
And these are earned rights.
These are earned rights. And that's, I think, where you have to be careful with who you grant this to. I think for most of the projects where I ended up with like more permissions than I would randomly grant any other contributor is I met the repo sort of owners or the team behind it in person as well. And that happened to like KubeCon or AWS reInvent. But I would never reject a PR if it made sense. But when it comes to handing out permissions, I would like to know who's behind the profile.
Yeah, makes sense. You met these people in person, and you actively kind of formed that connection with them, because you're also mentioning like you're introvert. I see myself as introvert as well, even though I'm a little bit more extrovert on the podcast, I guess. See myself as kind of different people in different circumstances, I guess. But stepping up to someone in a conference is still something that I find kind of quite daunting, to be honest. How did you do that?
I try to approach folks through Slack first.
Okay.
I have an asynchronous communication relationship with most of the folks in open source. We don't video call or do those things. No, we chat. People know each other by their GitHub handle. But at some point I did like the projects that I consistently contributed to and spent most of my sort of evenings and nights to. At some point you sort of meet each other at a KubeCon or an AWS reInvent or a Google Next. And for me to be able, I quickly, I think I realized to get more, I don't want to say authority, but to get more ownership on a particular project, I had to introduce myself.
It's trust.
It's trust.
Yeah.
This open source is built on trust. So I went ahead and like, for Crow, for example, Kube Resource Orchestrator, I reached out to the maintainers of that project, who are some folks over at AWS, Microsoft, and Azure. And we met at KubeCon and we sat down and they talked me through the potential things I could contribute to. And during the conference, I went back to my hotel room and started contributing to those items. And the next day we met up and he merged them and we spoke about it. And it's been a huge trust builder for the both of us.
Yeah.
For me, as in like, there's good leadership on this project. And for them, this is an actual trusted contributor who wants to sort of advance this project forward.
That's really cool.
And there's no other exchange. There's no, I don't pay them, they don't pay me. It's my
You also don't expect anything.
I don't expect anything. No. But funny enough, you sometimes do get something.
Yeah, but you don't expect it.
You don't expect it. No. Yeah. I think that's an interesting one. DHH, David Heinemeier Hansen, once shared is never run an open source project as a business. Because you will then, you build something, like I said before, I give my code to the community. You don't get to mandate what goes into my project. You absolutely do not. I will consider it, but even if it gets 100 upvotes, I might still reject it for what it's worth if it's not in line with my vision. And I think that's an important one. Some people do sort of community-driven development as they view that as their roadmap, whatever the community says. But a lot of solutions that are proposed might sometimes not be the best solution or are not in line with your thinking or vision. I think so. What David said was a community. Open source is not a community nor a democracy, which I think is something that's pretty powerful. Yeah.
Nice. I am wondering, and probably some listeners are thinking, okay, I understand open source. I've always given the advice of, I do think it's quite valuable, both for your skill set, but potentially for your career. And the potentially is quite a big thing. Like you mentioned, if you value this craft, you kind of find this passion for contributing. And there is no expectation that this will have certain outcomes. It's a belief that you need to have, and it's consistency. I feel like without that consistency part, and that consistency is still vague because it can be in very long time or it can be in shorter time. But I do think it's quite valuable, especially in the current market where getting your foot in the door is very difficult. I saw this post on Reddit, a person that said, I've hired hundreds of engineers. Now all the profiles I get are custom tailor-made based on the job description that we have, and they all look the same, which means how do I then filter the resume part already in and of its own? And if that becomes very hard, then getting your foot in the door, you need to think of alternatives. Yeah. I think open source is a good alternative.
It is. If you look for alternatives, you can consider contributing to vendors you would like to work for, right? And but I wouldn't recommend starting to contribute to a vendor's project with the assumption that you'll be hired one day. Similarly, opening a business to assume you'll become rich is also not a great plan, right? Find something you love doing and execute on that and be consistent, and then hopefully you will be recognized by those that benefit from your contributions. I've been recognized through like GitHub sponsor programs where I randomly got money from folks, like a lot of money, which I never understood why they would send it.
That's cool.
There was someone sending like hundreds of dollars over and over, which I never spoke to.
But do you know for what specifically?
I have no clue. It might be some
good
random,
for your legacy.
Yeah, it might be some random contributions that I did to one of these projects that hugely benefited them.
Yeah.
It might also be for something else. I don't know. But that's not what I do open source for. It's sort of this craftsmanship and me trying to position myself as a thought leadership in certain tools and industries and niches. And I happened to be offered a job at HashiCorp through all the contributions I did because I positioned myself within that community and within that ecosystem. And in addition to creating those PRs, I attended dozens or more than dozens of community hours and roadmap sessions with those teams. I attended multiple times HashiConf, which is the HashiCorp conference, where I spoke to the teams directly that I contributed to and some other folks. So that is that consistency that can get you somewhere, but it can also get you nowhere. And you shouldn't be disappointed if it doesn't get you anywhere. No, but it does help. If you're surrounded by the right people.
That's the part that contradicts, right? Because there might be an outcome, but there might not be. So I don't think it's bad that you have the intention that there might be an outcome, because that's reality, right? That's a maybe. But in the end, the fact that you might get disappointed, that's the risk in the end. I feel like you're a person that is very diligently doing their work and their effort, and you also get energy out of this. Otherwise, you would have never made it work, right? I feel like I can do a lot of things, and with discipline, I can do a lot of things for a long, long time. But the things that I've done for the longest, they also give me energy back in return. Because otherwise, you're just drained. If nothing counterbalances the effort that you put in, if you don't get energy out of the things that you do, that's how you kind of lose passion for the thing that you do in the first place.
Yeah, it is.
That's with a lot of things, actually.
It is. And I think something that's probably I've never shared that in public speaking before, but I'm a university dropout. I changed university for my first software engineering gig, as they approached me during my second year. And after leaving uni, I, in my view, had a pretty successful career as a software engineer. But moving from company to company over and over, you do have to sort of extra prove yourself somehow. There's no fancy certificate or diploma that I can put on my resume. So part of my resume is also my contributions. It's been years since I actually created a resume. Most of the jobs or companies I've now worked for was through folks approaching me on GitHub. Yeah.
That's really cool. That's like the status that you've built up.
It's rewarding. Yeah. It's also sometimes interesting because I've also had recruiters ask me like, hey, why was there no activity between month X and Y? They're like, yeah, I was on a holiday or conference season or
you have to explain yourself.
Yeah, that's something a little tough. And people sometimes do expect something from you.
Okay.
Currently, I'm doing construction on our house and trying to sort of understand what marriage is because we're trying to engage. And I haven't contributed a single line of code to open source for the past few weeks.
Okay.
And I wasn't sure if I had to feel guilty about this, or people started commenting on PRs like, hey, can this get reviewed? Or hey, what are your thoughts on this? Some of my draft PRs were even closed because things just took too long and things move on, right? Open source doesn't wait for you unless it's your project and you own everything. But yeah, I was also trying to consider, should I post something on social media or not? Like, hey, I'm currently dealing with life. I'm not always on. People sometimes expect you to be always on. I spend a good 16 to 20 hours sometimes on sitting behind my computer and suddenly going to prioritize things in life is interesting, how the community responds to that.
Yeah, I like your balanced approach though. Like some of my friends have said, building has become so easy now that if I don't build, it's almost like an addiction because now's the time and now tools are still a lot more affordable than potentially in 5 years, which means that this is the adoption phase. And once they have a lot of users, they can slowly up the prices, which means I want to get the most out of it right now. It sounds like there's an addiction in there. Did you ever get to a point where you were like, oh, I have to contribute and I have to do this continuously? Because now it sounds like you've kind of let that go.
Yeah, I think there were times where I trying to prove myself. So open source and vendors know this. They do a great job at having different tiers and ranks. So you can become a Terraform core contributor or an AWS CDK distinguished contributor. And you have to meet certain metrics which they don't share with you. So the amount of PRs you've opened or comments you've put, or there's a different type of metrics where they try and measure actual valuable contributions. That's a metric that they get to decide. And sometimes it's a little hard for you to understand, am I going to miss the boat or not this year? I was lucky enough to be 4 years like a recurring core contributor, but I never understood where that threshold was. So yeah, sometimes I did feel like I have to contribute, and that was sort of to meet those levels, which don't really mean anything besides a badge and a T-shirt. I guess that's what I do open source for. But there's also been times where life was a little harder, and again, it's sort of escapism worked well for me to sit behind the computer and just contribute, put my headset on, no meetings, just pure me writing code and solving problems. That's something you have to enjoy. So the same as some folks would turn on a PlayStation, which could be an addiction or a form of escapism, I happen to enjoy doing this.
I like that a lot.
And I think the sort of the network you build up through LinkedIn and people reaching out to you, it's rewarding. It's a great community to be part of.
That's great. Yeah. For me, I really admire people that have really cool acquired skills. And for me, the acquired skills that you can do kind of building in public or in this manner are just very cool.
Yeah.
It's not something that I've done in my career, but it is something that I admire. If I would go back, I don't think I would change a lot of my own career because I like where I ended up. But that doesn't mean that for someone else, it's not a good choice. I feel like it's a very solid way of working and way of acquiring skills, which is just, it's very cool and very unique, I would say. Yeah.
And I think another thing that could be really interesting to folks that are new to open source is something that was very valuable to me is you don't get to easily pick where you work, right? I would love to work on certain Google service teams or like AWS service teams, but they just don't happen to hire in the Netherlands or in Europe.
Yeah.
A lot of like interesting service teams are over in the US. But still, there are certain projects. And the reason why I'm saying this, like, I would like to work with some of the people that work there to be able to pick their brain and understand how they think. I started contributing to Crow, which is a joint effort by Google, Microsoft, and Azure, Google, Microsoft, and AWS. And when you join those community hours and when you speak to those maintainers, you get a chance to pick their brain. I get a chance to talk to one of the principal engineers that works on Amazon EKS, who also happens to be the co-founder of Ksurf. So you get to really learn from these people, and I think that is very valuable. Yeah,
I feel like there's quite a close way of building a connection rather than, I mean, they are overseas, they are in different companies. And I've never thought about this perspective, right? Where communities come together is where you can find people like that, which is very neat.
Yeah. And just be able to learn from them sort of for free is, I think, awesome. Yeah.
We've covered a lot with regards to open source, also your career path and what it has meant throughout there. Is there anything that we still haven't discussed, which you want to slice open before we leave off?
Putting me on the spot, interesting one. Not necessarily.
No. I wonder, because right now the bar for entry is quite easy to open source. Do you think it's going to get harder? Because the thing that you mentioned, it wasn't Valor, it was the other V, Vouch.
Yeah, Vouch.
That will, in the end, if the vision of Vouch holds true, then some projects might just say, well, you have to have X amount of, I see it as a point system, a ranking system.
Yeah.
You have to have a certain rank, which makes the open source not that open for contributors.
Yeah, I think something I would like to share with folks is like, I think agentic tooling to generate code is amazing and it gets you to contribute to some of these projects, but don't outsource your thinking to it, and don't let it sort of take away your personality and your craftsmanship when you contribute to these projects. We as maintainers and other maintainers of different projects love to guide people, especially beginners, through their first contributions. But it is also true, and I think it holds true, that we also expect a certain form of effort. And if you put 1 minute into something without a PR description, it's fair to say that I'm allowed to spend like another 5 minutes or 10 minutes on this as well. If you shape your contributions, don't outsource your thinking and your personality.
Perfect. Bruno, thank you so much for coming on. This was great.
Thank you, Patrick.
If you're still with us, let me know in the comments section what you thought of this episode, and we'll see you in the next one.